All right, welcome back. Today we're going to finish the art side of the print. I'm going to be working on the rendering just to make it pop a little bit more. Yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching and having patience. I've been a little busy lately. But yeah, I'm wearing the same shirt today because I recorded these two videos in the same day. Okay, just in case you notice I was wearing the same thing. We're going to use Clip Studio for this again. Works just like Photoshop. So if you're using Photoshop, that's fine too. It doesn't really matter. Just whatever you're comfortable with.
Please be comfortable. Please.
Once you have a seat, be comfortable.
Let's go. Alright, so today we're working on the light and shadow. A heavy portion of it will be shadow. I think that's usually the case. Shadow takes up a lot more time than the little highlights. The highlights are kind of like the finishing cherry on top. At least that's how I found it to be in my art pieces. So yeah, what I did here to start was I created a fill layer. You can do this in Clip Studio and Photoshop in the layers window. And I set a color usually to something, it depends on the environment. In this case, I like to do purple if I don't really have that much of an idea of what I want to go with. Instead of straight black and white, just because it gives things a little bit more of a color to it, and black and white can be a little bit too harsh of a shadow. So I set that layer to multiply, usually lower the opacity so it's not super harsh on that layer, and then I work on the mask layer to the right of that color fill. So the reason I do that is I have control over that color throughout the process. So if I want to make any tweaks on that color, it's applied to the whole image, and so it'll change it globally everywhere that I've masked or unmasked that layer. You know, it's going to make that change everywhere. So it's a really nice way to set yourself up for success and making changes later on if you decide the color is not doing what you want it to do. That's why I recommend that. I like to work non-destructively when I'm making pieces that I plan to sell or spend a lot of time on. If it's something like a really quick sketch or something, I don't care that much. I usually have only a few layers, but in this case, I want it to be non-destructive because I want to make decisions later on, or set myself up to be able to make those decisions. I think in this piece I don't end up changing it that much, but it's good to have that option. Always leave yourself options. That's what I recommend, especially if you're working for a client, because clients always come back with changes and you never know what that change is going to be. So you want to set yourself up for success and easy edits. You know, if you're hourly, you know, it's not too bad because you get paid for that time. But you want to finish this as an artist. You don't do it for the money. We're not in this for the money. We're in it for the passion. And the last thing you want to be doing is long edits to something you already did because you didn't set yourself up for quick success. So yeah, that's why I do it that way. You don't have to. You could always just do a whole layer with the color that you have selected and then do like a hue saturation shift or something like that. But in case you accidentally selected another color and you get all your colors all wonky, you know, it's just an extra step. There's always ways to fix it if it's all in one layer, but it's just the way I do it. I think it's nice to be able to have the color picker and move things around. Anyways, I'll stop talking about that. So what I like to think about when I'm doing shadow is hard edges and soft edges. Soft edges is the look you'll get on a more rounded object like a sphere. It's going to be a softer transition to the Terminator on a shaded object, and the Terminator being like the darkest point on that object, where it's where the bounce light and the source main light is the least amount. It's where it is the least. And you don't always get a Terminator. Sometimes the Terminator's like so faint you can't even tell, but since it's an illustration and we're not painting from life or anything like that, we'll definitely have a Terminator. And I intend to add like a little bounce light later on that you'll see. But yeah, so it's pretty easy to keep that in mind. It's like, is this a soft edge or a hard edge? Hard edge, you're gonna have a really hard line. If you want to indicate something that's a little bit of in between of a soft and a hard edge, then don't blur it out as much. I switch out between the painting tool that I'm using and then a blur tool. I think in Photoshop there's a blur and a smudge tool. Clip Studio has the same thing. For some reason, I haven't found it to work as well in Photoshop as it does in Clip Studio. But yeah, I'll use the blur tool to soften the edge. Either that or I'll airbrush it. But I tend to find I work faster and have more control over my softer edges when I use a blur tool instead of an airbrush. Because with the airbrush, I have to kind of do a selection layer, and I'll use like the magic wand on my line art and reference that art, which I think I've gone over that before in another video. But I'll probably do like a specific video about that. But so the extra step is you kind of need to make a selection so you don't have the airbrush go all over the place. Whereas if you paint like a solid shape, you're not having to use a selection tool. You're just painting it in, quickly switching to your blur tool or smudge tool with a hotkey. I set mine to D. And yeah, it's a quick process. Otherwise it would be like magic wand, hit my airbrush tool, airbrush it in, and kind of tweak the opacity settings on that. Whereas like with the blur tool, the more you rub it in, the softer it gets and the more subtle of a transition you get. So I really recommend that. That's my workflow currently. I occasionally will do airbrush, especially if I want a little bit of texture, because I have some textured airbrushes. But you can also set the smudge and the blur tools in Clip Studio to have a little bit of texture. And in Photoshop, I'm sure you could do that too. So yeah, I really do that for the whole process. There's not really any change in that whenever you're painting, especially if you don't do like cell shaded. If you do like a different, more realistic approach to shadow, that's the process, and that's what this video is excuse me. That's what the process of this video is doing that over and over again. You're kind of in cruise control. You're just cruising when you're doing this. If you noticed, I have some red arrows that are on a separate layer. That I use that as a reference to make sure that all my shadows are consistently being affected by the same light source. That's the light source direction. And because this is sunlight produces parallel shadows. So no matter what, those lights are going to be parallel. They're not going to be expanding out. Unlike spotlights and different light sources, though like say if you have like studio lights set up, in that case it's going to be from from only that direction. So if like a bunch of sticks are surrounding a light source that goes in all directions, it's going to span out kind of like a 1-point perspective. But sunlight, it's always going to be parallel. And in the case of this illustration, everything's going to be parallel because I'm using sunlight as my main source. Bounce light would obviously go in kind of a starburst direction of all the different directions that it bounces off of. But yeah, I'm making this easy on myself because it's such a detailed and complex illustration that, yeah, using the sun concept of shadow will make things a lot easier. So a little thing that I want to mention is that, or this is a big thing that I want to mention. You don't just naturally understand how light and shadow works. This is after years, decades of studying and learning about how light and shadow work. So you're not going to be able to figure this out right away, but over time, after doing studies, you're going to get more comfortable with how light works, how shadow works, how soft edges and hard edges work. But you got to practice. You got to put in. This is probably one of the things you have to put. You're going to get more levels of improvement once you figure out how light and shadow works, especially if your style is rendering. If you do a lot of flat artwork, it's not as important, but this will work for cell shading. It'll work for more realistic shading approaches. Your level is going to go to the next level once you learn this stuff, but it takes a while. It takes a lot of practice, but you do get to a point where you're comfortable doing it without a reference. Like I did this piece without any reference, just my knowledge of how shadow works. And that's just going to take time. It's going to take years and years of practice, but you'll get there and it's worth it. Yeah, you can do this. I believe it. I am in the camp that believes that this stuff is learned and practiced. You're not just naturally gifted with an understanding of how light and shadow works. Maybe some people are, but I'm not. I had to earn this. You have to earn this skill and understanding, and you can always get better. I'm still learning, and I'm still finding better ways to do this and getting a better understanding of how that three-dimensionality works with light and shadow. So yeah, with that, I think I'm going to speed things up a little bit, not show all the time lapse because I don't think it's useful to just crank through all the footage at a really fast speed. I want it to just be double what it's currently at and kind of do just a couple sections and maybe for like 2 minutes. And then we'll get into the next section of the commentary. So talk to you then. All right, so I just turned on the color, the flat color layer to be precise from our last video. I turned that layer back on and have our shadow layer right over it. And as you can see, it's a good result. I like the way it looks. Now I'm currently taking like an airbrush and I use that shadow layer. I turned on that selection mask and I'm using that shadow layer as my reference for painting in my bounce light, because the bounce light will only show up in the shadow because our sunlight source is a lot brighter than the bounce light, so it doesn't really show up on in those lighted areas. So I'm taking an airbrush using the color of the sky as kind of the bounce light that we have, because it's a very cool color that will be being produced from the ambient light. And I'm painting that in to give it a little bit more depth, because I think natural light and realistic light usually has some sort of bounce light from a lot of different directions, sometimes just a few. And then I go in with the same brush. I set up another fill layer to do my highlights, and I use that mask layer concept just like I did for the shadows, and I do that for the highlights. I set this one to an overlay. I might play around with it and put it into a screen blending mode. If I didn't mention before, multiply, overlay, that's all different blending modes. Hopefully you know that in Photoshop or Clip Studio by now. If you don't know that stuff, definitely check it out in YouTube, search, because that's a really important concept that you need to know if you want to do digital art. For my light source and highlight section, I'm using a yellowish white, just because I want to contrast the blue that's being used and the kind of cool color that I'm using for the shadows with the purple shadows and the blue bounce light. Using a warm yellow is a nice contrast. You should definitely be considering that when you're making a piece, is the contrast between cool and warm. It can really... using that principle can really help make your picture pop, having a good, strong understanding of that balance between the two. Highlights, I kind of want to make it look a little rough of a shape in some areas, like it's got a little bit of texture to it. It's a little bit of a rough shape. It's not entirely just a smooth shape. Go very sparingly on the highlights, depending on, the subject matter. In this case, it's iconic, and it's not a really moody, dramatic piece like you might do with like portraiture or something like that. So I'm doing it subtly in this case. Sometimes you do want to push it hard if you want something to be very dramatic. I don't typically do that in line art illustrations. Just because I think the focus in line art illustrations should be more so the line art than anything else. So don't want to just detract from that. But yeah, it all depends on what you're trying to do. You want to be thoughtful when you're planning these things out, or when in the process of making them. Think about that. It's like, what do I want to emphasize? In this case, I'm emphasizing the whole shape. There's some standout points like the eyes and the nose and the mouth that I think the viewer will naturally be drawn to. But in this case, it's all one unit, so I want everything to have kind of an importance. And I'm not trying to necessarily tell the viewer what to look at, so everything can have like a little bit of poppiness to it. So yeah, with that, I also didn't finish all the shadows yet, but I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I want to see what the color looks like underneath, and how can is it working well? And I didn't do too much shifting or adjusting. You might have seen earlier I was playing around with some weird filters and stuff like that to see if everything was working. And occasionally I'll turn on like a black and white filter so I can see if the contrast is nice enough, or if I need to pump it, because it helps to visualize it that way. But Yeah, I think for the fact that I usually do a straight on topo overhead light source, this time doing a side view was a challenge for me, and I think it went well. I'm really happy with the results. I think it's a little more interesting when the light is coming from a different direction than just the top source, but if you want things to be super iconic, that might be the best option for you, because we're not going for realism here. It's definitely stylized, but we also want to be thoughtful. I feel like when I'm intentional, thoughtful about all these things and considering them, you get the best result. And this might be coming from stemming from my experience as like an art director on a video game, and have to think about those things in depth. But you can do it too. Maybe you can be an art director someday. Maybe you already are one. But that's definitely some things you should consider, because it all adds up. Adding all the different art principles and theories, it adds up, and I think since those are like the tried and true methods of making art look good, and I like to approach it in an analytical sense. It's not all about feeling. It's about using tools and concepts. So yeah, with that, I think this piece is just about done. What we'll be doing next is planning to order this, get it printed, and I'll go into detail of what I want, what type of paper and whatnot, and the reason behind it. But yeah, I think this is an improvement from the Watcher design that here's a reminder of what it looks like. I think it's good. I think this is better than what we had before. So this is a success. And yeah, let's get prints of this made. I'm really excited. So stay tuned. Like this video. Subscribe to my channel if you want to get notified when the next video comes out and when this print gets released. It's going to be a limited edition, and I'm never going to reprint it again. So if you want it, make sure you get it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.